Hello, I'm Shannon Tiesi with the Diplomat, and I'm here today at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, where I'm very happy to be sitting down with Vikram Nehru, who is a senior associate here at the Carnegie Endowment, and he is going to be talking us through some of the economic challenges and opportunities facing ASEAN in this special year as they move towards the ASEAN Economic Community. Thank you so much for joining us, Vikram.
Always good to talk to you, Shannon.
So the ASEAN countries say they are on track as scheduled to establish the economic community by the end of 2015. What is this going to actually mean in practice for regional economic integration?
Well, first, a little bit of background. The ASEAN Economic Community is one of three different communities that ASEAN is building. The other is the political security community and the socio-cultural community. Now, the ASEAN community is supposed to come into being by the end of this year. It was earlier it was meant to be January the 1st, but now pushed it to December the 31st. And the intention is to have four different objectives met. The first is a single market and production base. The second is equal development. The third is connectivity, and the fourth is global integration. And underpinning these four objectives are actually 506 action items. And ASEAN now reports that 458 or over 90% of those action items have actually been completed by the member states of ASEAN. So when people are saying that the ASEAN Economic Community is on track, this is what they're pointing to. But what will it mean for integration? And my answer is actually not very much, because a lot of the integration has already taken place in ASEAN. The reality is that all ASEAN countries are members of the WTO, and they have unilaterally liberalized their trade. In fact, that's been the underpinning of ASEAN's economic growth. And now, the way ASEAN countries are dealing with, say, protecting their industries and protecting their businesses is through behind-the-border measures, things like excise taxes, licensing, and other ways by which they protect their domestic industries where they feel their domestic industries need protection. So whether you look at trade in goods, or you look at trade in services, or even if you look at foreign investor protections and liberalization, in each of these instances, every one of these countries has different instruments that they apply to protect their domestic businesses. So I don't think one should think of the ASEAN Economic Community deadline of December the 31st, 2015 as some kind of an end date. It's a milestone in a longer term effort to increase integration, and the future agenda continues to be huge. Removing these behind the border barriers, ensuring domestic regulations are fully consistent with the objectives of the ASEAN Economic Community, and having investor protection that is common across all countries, and is not just investor protection provided to ASEAN countries but also to all countries of the world.
So while ASEAN moves towards this economic community as a whole, you have some but not all of the members involved in negotiations for the TransPacific Partnership, which has its own set of standards for market openness. How is that going to affect the economic integration of ASEAN?
Well, you're quite right that Brunei, Singapore, Malaysia, and Vietnam are the four ASEAN countries that are going to be in the 12-member TPP. And in the TPP, like any other FTA, free trade arrangement, will inevitably lead to more trade for the members of that FTA, but lead to a diversion of trade away from the rest of the world, including other ASEAN countries. So if you look at all the simulations which have been done for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, members of the Trans-Pacific Partnership benefit unequivocally, but other members of ASEAN are hurt, not by a lot, but they're hurt a little by the creation of the TPP. Now, the TPP tries to overcome this problem by hopefully, we'll have a system whereby other countries can join the TPP once the TPP is concluded. In other words, you can have a second round and a third round. And hopefully many of the other ASEAN countries will eventually join the TPP. Countries like Indonesia and Thailand and the Philippines could also join the TPP, provided that they reach the high standards the TPP requires. Now, all of this assumes that the TPP will go ahead, and it assumes that the 4 countries that I just mentioned, the ASEAN countries that are part of the TPP, will become ultimate signatories of that agreement.
Mm. And you also have another initiative, not specifically trade-focused, but economic certainly, from China, their 21st Century Maritime Silk Road project, which they see as a vehicle for infrastructure development, but also economic integration for China, East Asia, Southeast Asia, all the way through to Europe. What role do you see this Silk Road initiative playing in ASEAN's economic future?
Well, first of all, it's important to remember that ASEAN's economic future is going to be driven by ASEAN. It's going to be driven by the ASEAN countries themselves, whether they will continue to reform, maintain macroeconomic stability, retain trade openness. And there are many drivers for growth in these countries. The fact that services trade can increase, there's technology improvements, there's ICT. There are a lot of potential drivers for future growth. One of those drivers is indeed infrastructure that further connects these economies one with the other. And that's where China's initiative of One Belt, One Silk Road comes in. Now, if China provides financing and technical support for building ports in a number of ASEAN countries, just as it has done in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and Pakistan, then this will be good for China, because it means that China will have access to these ports, access to these markets, and can also get resources from these countries for China's own economic activity. But it's also good for ASEAN, because ASEAN would benefit simply by reducing transport costs and reducing logistical costs, which are a serious challenge in ASEAN. Now, for example, there is right now an initiative going on for Indonesia to get access to large amounts of Chinese financing, some of which is going towards the development of ports, and a substantial amount is going for port development through Indonesian state enterprises. And through that, Indonesia hopes to achieve its aim of becoming a maritime power and reducing its own transport costs. And I think it will benefit China as well.
So do you think this Maritime Silk Road is generally a popular idea in ASEAN? Are countries excited about it and ready to accept this Chinese investment?
I think they're looking at it very carefully. It's not, I wouldn't call it excitement. They're looking at it as a potential opportunity that they could use. But they're also looking at it from a strong long-term strategic point of view. And what does this mean in terms of overall independence, their own sovereignty, their security interests, as well as their economic interests. I think countries in ASEAN recognize the economic power of China. China has, after all, its growth has driven growth in ASEAN to some extent. And therefore, having additional infrastructure to connect them with the Chinese economy and to connect them one with another, I think will benefit them, and they're looking at it very carefully.
Mm-hmm. Now, at the same time, you have increasing concerns about China's economic driver ability because its growth is seen to be slowing down. Is this a major concern for ASEAN? How reliant are they on China's continued economic growth for their own economic growth?
There is no doubt. ASEAN's trade to GDP ratio is 130%, which is the highest of any region in the world. In other words, this is a very open region. And therefore, what happens in the rest of the world matters for ASEAN. And what happens in China matters for ASEAN, because China is the big giant trading partner that ASEAN has. And so, yes, the declining growth, especially the demand for commodities, has already had an impact on ASEAN. ASEAN's growth is slowing. But having said that, as I said earlier, what really will drive growth in ASEAN is ASEAN's own economic policies, its own reform efforts, its own ability to develop infrastructure. So while on the one hand, ASEAN will be influenced by developments in the rest of the world and in China, on the other, if it continues to reform and introduce the right policies, its trend rate of growth will continue to be well above the average rate of growth, for example, in the world. So its trend rate of growth will be decoupled from the world, even though variations around that trend may be coupled with the rest of the world, and particularly with China.
Now, within ASEAN itself, we've seen some interesting political developments. In Malaysia, you have an election coming up in Myanmar. Thailand's political situation continues to be a bit uncertain. How are all of these political factors going to affect economic policy making moving forward?
Interestingly enough, as far as trade integration is concerned, in none of the countries where there's now heightened political uncertainty, Myanmar, Thailand, and Malaysia, do you actually see any trend towards protectionism? In other words, all of these countries have maintained their trade policies and their economic policies to a reasonable extent. The irony is, it is the country which doesn't have heightened political uncertainty, which is Indonesia, which has had a trend towards increased protectionism. And here what you basically got in Indonesia has been a long-term trend. Indonesia benefited a great deal from the commodity boom generated by China's rapid growth following the global economic crisis. But since that, and during that period, during that economic boom, good times make for bad policies. Indonesia began to introduce protectionist policies to protect its various industries, as well as protect, for example, its mining sector and its smelting industries. Now that China's growth is slowing, commodity prices have bottomed out, have come down significantly. Indonesia's growth rate has gone down to around 4.5%. And this has focused minds on how to improve and raise that economic growth again. And so the Indonesian president has introduced a raft of economic policies, new economic reforms, 89 of them, but unfortunately none of them have to do with trade policy. And that continues to be a big issue in Indonesia, which I believe it must look at and reform if it wants to retain and regain a relatively high rate of growth.
So, overall, taking all of this discussion into account, what is your prognosis for ASEAN's economic future?
Well, I remain an optimist for ASEAN. As I said, I mean, ASEAN is a region which has displayed remarkably good policies for a very long time. It is a region which has maintained high rates of growth over a 30 to 40-year period. It remains a very open region. And provided ASEAN can deal with some of its challenges, some of them to do with political stability, some of them to do with infrastructure development, and provided they remain open to trade and foreign investment, I think it has a remarkably bright future. So I believe that ASEAN is very, very capable of having 6% growth rates for a long period of time. It, after all, can significantly catch up with the productivity levels of the advanced countries. There's a large gap between ASEAN productivity and world product and the advanced country productivity, so there's a catch-up effect that they can potentially capture. But it all depends on what their policies are going to be, and that we're going to have to wait and see.
Well, thank you so much for helping talk with us about ASEAN's future.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Shannon. Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in. Once again, I'm Shannon Tiezi with The Diplomat.